beautiful people. Constructive trust. You've heard of that term before. I know you have. Now, whether or not the implications of it and derivatives of how it comes, how it's used, but more importantly, how it is applied to you and that thing most of us seek, called restitution. One way or another, whether it's by way of a subtle interest where we don't really have any issue right now, but we have to be prepared. If you have something of value, you have to protect it. Or some people are in some imminent circumstance where they're anticipating or they're already in a situation. So they start to listen to things of this nature. They hear certain terms and words. Some conclude that they got it in the process of hearing those words. Others not so much. So when they look into it, they interpret it based on their level of awareness. Others don't even think twice about it. The amount of time we spend on this earth is wholly insufficient for us to claim accolades when it comes to what we know of our abilities. Yeah, self-confidence is essential, but for the most part, those who figure some things out always come to the enlightenment that they know nothing due to the varying degrees that awareness comes in. Spending 90 years, 80 years, or 40 years on earth is insufficient to claim some accolade of competence. For goodness sake, people used to live thousands of years. If one takes a quick glimpse at the ruling time period of certain emperors and empress kings, one will realize some of them were on the throne for 400 years to 1,000 years in some cases. Now that really raises some serious question as to what's really going on with us. We have devolved so much that 90 years or 40 years is like a fetus for a human. Whether one would like to consider a human an animal or not is not what we're considering here. But 90, 40 years, 50 years is a very small time period for a human being to accumulate some level of intelligence. Did you know that? Have you ever put that into consideration? And that is not even considering the spiritual portion of life, which is about the majority of the experience itself. Many of us are babies in the mind and in the spirit. We may get more wrinkly and saggy, but to be more wrinkled up and saggy is not equivalent in any way to growth. In fact, that is just an evidence of entropy, not the other way around. Chronological age for most humans in 21st century is simply not equivalent to the types of intelligence or awareness of how anything works. We are all children. We grow slightly taller in the body, but most of us are under self-directed hypnosis of something that once occurred to us in the past that we aren't even aware of, that holds us back from our own true potential. See, with pen and paper and information that people hear in between conversations, or certain phrases, or certain words, certain concepts and principles, many people are that exact same way. Many people are under the impression that because they've been reading a bunch of PDFs, they've been reading or listening to something years after years after years, they think that's synonymous with competence. It is not. It's like a mason. A mason can be in an organization for 30, 40, 50 years of his or her life. It can be in that same 1 degree. Some people, it takes them 60, 70 years to figure out something about themselves emotionally. Whereas someone at age 15 or 20 figured that out once upon a time. And guess what? Just like you can figure something else once upon a time, you can forget about it and keep making the same mistake. These principles that apply in other aspects and walks of life apply when it comes to pen and paper, because this thing, when it comes to comprehending the varying degrees of laws that exist, whether the man-made law is harmonious with nature's law and ecclesiastic law or otherwise, there are varying degrees to it. And just because you hear a term does not mean you really know what it is. And if you know what it is, how it's applicable and why it's applicable is an entirely different story. So let's talk about constructive trust. We all hear about trust. Everyone is going on about, do you trust, do this, do that. Oh, okay. That's good. That's good. And every now and then you will hear people speak about, oh, they do constructive trust on your ligas to make you an artificial person. So you have to go in there, do special appearance. I'm not the artificial person because, your bond. Oh, cool, good. All those words are buzzwords that you're just throwing out there because you loosely have this idea that something is wrong. And you have the rightful sense of urgency to do something about it. That's a start. But let's take those buzzwords just a little bit further. Let's actually look into all these words people use and say, but they never really explain. Imagine someone who's newly introduced to it, or someone who was not newly introduced to these words and don't even know the functional part of those words. Let's take a look at constructive trust. Constructive trust. A constructive trust is an equitable remedy. You know what? Let's actually go to one of those dictionaries that people love so much. Because apparently and truthfully, the best way to actually show someone something or to provide clarity for the details of what someone thinks they already get is to start, because the brain will provide less bias and less subconscious walls when you start there. A lot of people are under the presumption that Wikipedia is inaccurate because truthfully anyone can edit it. Nonetheless, there's a checks and balance system that gives you reference here that you can look at. In some cases, these references points to case laws. Some of them points to law dictionaries. Some of them points to books regarding the specific subject matters. But you know what? Let's just take the path that's most likely more convenient for a lot of people to easily accept, since that's what they're used to. So let's go to those law dictionaries people love. Let's begin with this beautiful word called construct. Recall, what we're looking at here is this phrase or this term, constructive trust. But this term has two very specific terms in it. At this point, I think it's reasonable to say most people at least know what the term trust means. From the layman's interpretation of it to its applicability to preservation of interest, persons, papers, effect, when it comes to the operation of things. But then there's this other thing called constructive. So if we're going to look at this thing called constructive trust, let's look at the parts which make up the whole. Let's begin with the term construct. To build, to erect, sometimes used in the sense of to provide. When someone provides something to you, they are in a position to control. When someone provides something to you, they are in a position to protect. When someone provides something to you, they are in a position to strip that which was provided. In other words, their interest in the properties, persons, papers, and effect that is being provided can be controlled. We're all too familiar with the term own nothing, control everything, which, if one is quite savvy to how principles of trust work, and the details of it, you would realize that's really what trust is about. When someone provides, they can limit how that which is being provided is used. They can construct it. They can build it. When you build something, you are the architect. You are the creator of that thing. When you erect it, you can decide how far it goes, how tall it goes, how thin it is. You become the creator and the controller of that which is provided. Same versus Tacoma. So therein is the first word within that term. Again, we are talking about constructive trust with the underlying intent that those watching this already know what trust is, or at least I hope you do at this point, and that there are different types. And one of those different types of trust, as it affects the people's daily activities and lifestyle and affairs, is this thing called constructive trust. Trust exists for the purpose of preserving life, property, effect, and persons, where different parties come into the same equation for the purpose of either protecting that property, person, effect, or the interest thereof, where different parties come in for the purpose of benefiting from that person, property, effect, or the interest thereof, where different parties come in for the purpose of delegating authority to that person, property, effect, and the interest thereof. In order for you to do that with different roles that you play, you have to trust their ability for once, and in their competency. Their competency and their ability is as far as the limits and the ability of that body politic called the trust, which constitute the different people that come in to play the different roles: trust protector, trustee, beneficiary, grantor, aka settler, and the varying degrees of authorized personnel, whether as a proxy or just for public purpose of being an authorized representative, whether financially or otherwise, and other details that we are not going to speak of here on YouTube. That's just a general outline of what a trust is. It's a very simple, no-brainer concept. Constructive, on the other hand, has the basic word construct within it. If we know what a trust is, for those who don't know what a trust is or presume they already did, well, clarity of what a trust is has been summarily and succinctly provided. But when you come to the issue of constructive trust, there's this word called construct within it. We just defined what construct also is, which is the process of building something. Building what? Building said trusts, where the different parties who play the role to protect it, the role to benefit it, the role to create it, and the role to oversee it. Whereas the trustees or the board of trustees are synonymous with the legislative department, like you would have in a government. The trust protector will play the role of the judiciary like you have in a government. The grantor or the settler will play the role of the executive department like you have in a government. The beneficiary to a trust will play the role of we the people like you would have in any given body politic. Then you can have outside agencies, contractors, subcontractors, however you choose. Okay, those are the basics. Within this term, constructive trust, it's the word construct. It means to build, to erect, sometimes to provide. On the note of a trust where you already have your affairs organized, why would someone then want to provide? Why would someone then have a need to build or to erect? These terms, to build, erect, or to provide, are retroactive to the initial existence and the purpose of a trust. Hence, A constructive trust is a type of trust. By the way, this is Valentine's 3rd edition. So now let's look at the entirety of the word, or the term, or the phrase, constructive trust. Constructive trust, a trust by operation of law. You know what operation of law is? Operation of law is legal things. So no matter where you go to and fro, you would always be met with legal things. For those who say one thing can be lawful but can't be legal, we only deal with lawful stuff. All right, we keep dealing with lawful stuff without realizing that legal things is just by way of what the law stipulates, aka operation of law. Constructive trust, a trust by operation of law, meaning there are stipulations on a substantial level that's already been set out as the foundation. Like when you're building a house, you have to build a skeletal structure. You have to build the foundation. Those are the basics that hold up what a house is. Generally speaking, you would need a structure, a basic structure. And these basic structure, before the operation of it comes into play, it's called substantial due process, which we go over it on Patreon, the difference between what a substantial due process and a procedural due process is. A trust by operation of law, which arises, meaning it comes up and gets triggered and something else already pre-exists. A trust by operation of law which arises contrary to intention and against the will, declared against one who by fraud, actual or constructive, meaning there are different types of fraud. There's actual fraud and there's constructive. By duress or abuse of confidence. Confidence is trust. When you have confidence in something, you trust in it. Confidence is just a substitute word for trust. By commission of wrong or by any form of unconscionable conduct. Unconscionable conduct deals with contractual things. Things that requires consent and agreement whereby it's done only by one party or both parties did it, but there was an omission of something very important that had the other party known, they would not have done it. Hence, unconscionable contract or unconscionable construct, or it is committed by wrong. It is actual or constructive trust. It's done by duress or the abuse of confidence, the abuse of trust. By any form of unconscionable conduct, artifice, concealment, or questionable means. The omission of truth is synonymous with falsehood. And concealment is one of the elements of actual fraud. Actual fraud has its own element. Constructive trust has its own. Concealment is one of the elements of actual fraud. Or questionable means, meaning, okay, we see what you did here, but it raises the question as to whether it's right or wrong. Either has obtained or hold the legal right to property. Remember the purpose and significance of a trust, which is to preserve the integrity of a person, effect, or property and the interest thereof. So now someone is coming in and they are using the operation of law. They are using the natural process of what goes on in everyday life in the world of pen and paper. But they are using that natural means that naturally occur. They are using it as the opposite. Now, this part is a part that will take a lot of people into a roller coaster ride. Listen to this. A trust by operation of law, which arises contrary to intention and against the will. Declared, meaning a constructive trust by way of operation, is declared despite the fact that you don't agree with it. It is declared against you or someone else who by fraud, actual or constructive, by duress or abuse of confidence, by commission of wrong, or by any form of unconscionable conduct, artifice, concealment, or questionable means, either has obtained or hold a legal right to property which he ought not, in equity and good conscience hold and enjoy. In other words, constructive trust gets triggered. It arises when the presumption is that you, the one holding it, is doing so by means of fraud, by concealment, or you have obtained or you are currently holding the legal right to a property which you ought in equity. Remember, equity does that which is ought, which you ought not to hold and enjoy. One who has been conditioned to think constructive trust means someone is doing something bad to you and they're a fraud for that. They will read this and think, oh yeah, that conforms to my perception that constructive trust is bad. But in truth, constructive trust is letting you know that it comes into play for the purpose of doing right when someone is already wrong. And that right must be done by operation of law, even if it is against the will. The constructive trust is a trust by operation of law, which arises, it comes up, it gets triggered, contrary to intentions and against the will, meaning regardless of what someone wants, it gets triggered by it being declared against one who, by fraud, has obtained or holds the legal right to property which he ought not, in equity, hold and enjoy. If it's not clear at this point, constructive trust is as simple as this. You are currently doing or holding something that does not belong to you, and you do not want to let it go. So we are going to use the process of things, the procedural due process of things, to take it from you. Because according to what equity say, equity being a remedy, equity being a perfection of that law, and most trust matters sits at equity, sits in the realm of equity. So this thing that you are now holding, or this thing that you're attached to, or this thing that is presumed that you have an interest in, it is going to be stripped from you against your will. And we're going to do it the same way a trust is usually created, through a declaration of trust. So when you hear most people speak of constructive trust, oh, they're adjudicating and they gain jurisdiction of the legas by doing constructive trust. Okay, all right, that sounds real cool to hear. But one who hears that and is seeking some sort of restitution because they have been done wrong, they will take that phrase or that explanation as, oh, they're doing something wrong. Constructive trust is bad. But in truth, the actual meaning of constructive trust is whoever is enforcing it is actually doing right, because the presumption is you, the one they're enforcing it against, is in the wrong. And despite the fact that you don't want to let go of that which is wrong that you're doing, they will take it nonetheless through a declaration of constructive trust. Constructive trust, a trust by operation of law, which arises contrary to the intent and against the will, declared against one who by fraud, actual or constructive, by duress or abuse of confidence, by commission of wrong, declared against one who by duress, declared against one who by fraud, declared against one who by abuse of confidence, declared against one who by commission of wrong, declared against one who by any form of unconscionable conduct, declared against one who by concealment, artifice, or questionable means. A constructive trust is a trust by operation of law, which arises contrary to intent and against the will, declared against one who holds the legal rights to property which he ought not. A constructive trust is a trust by operation of law which arises contrary to intentions and against the will, declared against one who holds and enjoy any given property because they ought not to. So now you see that whoever is enforcing the constructive trust is presumed to be the one doing the right thing. This is the reason why the power of the people, of the state, is always being brought against you. This is the reason why the case citation would always say the state of so-and-so, or the people of the state of so-and-so versus you. Because if they bring the claim on behalf of the people of the state, then it puts them in a position as though they are doing something right to trigger constructive trust, to change your position to society at large. Because the primary contention of criminal activity is that you are a danger to society, no matter what they title that criminal activity, no matter how or where they statutize it. The intent of prosecution of a criminal activity is to prevent you from being a danger to yourself and the society at large. And then you bring the power of the people for the purpose of the, quote, public safety based on public trust doctrine to do a constructive trust on behalf of the people against you. That's why they always presume that you've abused something, that your acts were questionable, that you are under the commission of some wrong. That is why automatically and arbitrarily they always make you a defendant. So now ask yourself this very important question at this juncture. Whenever constructive trust is being done through the ens legis, which is an entity of its own, which is a trust that has shareholders for the purpose of monetary gain, by way of using you as the machine that oils the wheel of that monetary gain. Whenever the constructive trust is being done through these courthouses, through mortgage, the presumption, ask yourself, are they right? Because all that is constructive trust. The moment they sue you in a court case, they've declared war against you. And there are several parties within that system that makes that work. From the clerk, to the acting judge, to the attorney, to the cop, if they're involved. Whenever someone works in concert as a means to an end, they have confidence in one another and trust one another. They are playing different role for the purpose of constructing that ens legis to which you are joined as a party for the purpose of personal jurisdiction. It is an in rem jurisdiction issue, not a personal jurisdiction issue. Those are two different types of issues, but they homogenize it through constructive trust because the presumption is that you have done something wrong. And since this term construct means to build, to provide, has to do with the process of creating something, they can create the reality they wish by putting you on the docket constantly at all times as defendant. If it's a lispendence, you will be the defendant. If it's a traffic situation, you will be the defendant. If it's a levy or a lien, you will be the defendant. If it's a loan matter that some company and their representatives through their attorneys are suing you, oh, you will be the defendant. That is how they do it. They create a declaration, a formal declaration, by constructing and erecting and building said declaration against you under the presumption that one way by fraud, one way by abuse, one way by the commission of a wrong, one way through your concealment or through questionable means that you've performed, you are doing something that you ought not to do. Thus, anytime they sue you and you're a defendant, automatically they are evoking equity against you. Everything most people are saying they're going to now run to as a remedy that they say it's special, it has been continuously done to them without them even realizing it. For instance, on the Patreon page, we go over motion to dismiss. Did you know that motion to dismiss is actually an equitable relief? Because it retroactively says that something that exists ought not to. We'll leave that there. But most of the things that are done against the everyday man or woman, no matter how subtle it is, you know, when they tell you, don't park on this side of the street during this time, do you know that's constructive trust? Think of any form of regulation that's done, either through the codified public laws, SLIPS laws, congressional laws on a state level, or through municipal private contract called municipal codes that they are arbitrarily enforcing against people. All of that is constructive trust under the presumption that you are lower and that you are already doing wrong, and thus they need to regulate you. The presumption of what they are doing, especially when people admit and self-confess that they're doing constructive trust, which is not necessarily wrong. But know that whenever you use that term and you say, oh, they're doing constructive trust, know that you're saying that they are in the right, or that there's a presumption that they are in the right and you are wrong. It is not false that they don't do constructive trust, because they do in fact enforce constructive trust. But know what constructive trust is, so that you can know how to actually flip the positions properly. This is why solutions when it comes to procedural due process, such as counterclaim, cross claims, third party claims, interpleaders, all that, that's why they exist. But if you don't even know the terms that's being used or what is being done, if you're not acclimated to the term in the first instance, how can you begin to even see the need to fix an issue? When someone says that they have to regulate a certain right, that is constructive trust. This is the importance of why people have to declare their own trust. Your intent has to be succinct. Which brings us back here. A constructive trust is an equitable remedy imposed by a court to benefit a party that has been wrongfully deprived of its rights due to either a person obtaining or holding a legal property right which they should not possess due to unjust enrichment or interference, which is a contractual term, or due to breach of fiduciary duty, which is intercausative with unjust enrichment or property interference. It is a type of implied trust. It is created by conduct, not explicitly by settler. It is created by conduct, meaning someone triggers it, contrary to who the one who created that initial trust that is being construed, constructed, intended. Hence, it is being done against the will of the settler. Most people don't even have a trust. So now it's a freebie and you really don't even have a chance of fighting in any way. You don't even have a chance of speaking in any way. So ask yourself, do you have the proper trust? when you really know how trust works, you will see that that is the main vehicle of operation in everything within the formal setting of court and within the outside formal setting of court. We've shown it differently in different occasions. The whole face mask situations at different venues. Audio of that is shown on Patreon page, and others situations to come regarding the use of trust in everyday life. Trust is extremely important. Constructive trusts are imposed by operation of law. They are also referred to as implied trusts. They are not subject to formality requirements. Let's repeat that again. Constructive trusts are not subject to formality requirements. See the reason why they just arbitrarily remove things from dockets, change case numbers, do whatever they want, and you just get upset? Well, these people are fraud. The presumption that they're functioning under is that they're constructing a trust for the purpose of preventing fraud. Thus, they are not subject to formality of requirements. So now, if they primarily function based on constructive trust, which is not subject to formality requirements, if you do not know the formality requirements itself to snap them back like a rubber band, presuming you're already coming in properly, how then are you ever going to survive the world that they're constantly throwing at you? Because constructive trust is just another way for them to run away from that which they are bound by. Constructive trust is another well-built loophole. In other videos, we went over what a loophole is. A loophole is not an accident. A loophole is not something that's happenstance. A loophole is not something that you just stumble upon and go, oh, I'm going to take advantage of it because it's not supposed to exist. No. A loophole is something that's specifically designed into the structure of something for a very specific purpose. A loophole is a term used when it comes to architecture of castles, whereby someone can shoot trajectories like arrows and things like that from a specific location. That location is called a loophole. It is inbuilt into the structure and the architecture of something. It's not accidental. It's not retroactive. It's not something that was not once meant to be, but they finally figured it out and they're using it against you. No. The loophole of constructive trust was designed as part of the quote system that people go on about, so that they could not be subject to formality requirements. Now pose this question to yourself. Do you even know the formality requirements in the first instance? Because those same formality requirements also tells you that in certain circumstances, constructive trust don't apply. So now to people who go, oh, well, something can be lawful but not legal, we're not going to deal with all that processes and there's those procedures and those rules because they're automatically unlawful. Those same rules are procedural due processes that constitute formality requirements that in many cases are actually constitutional to your benefit. If you don't know those, you are going butt naked in a -degree weather. You're not going to survive it. Do yourself a favor and be well acclimated with the playing field. And once you hear certain terms, know the proper applicability of said terms. Don't just use it to justify your own perception or your own need to make something appear a certain way. Be realistic with yourself. Unlike a resultant trust, which also arises by operation of law, a constructive trust does not give effect to the imputed or presumed intention of the party. And whatever it is you want to do, you say you're free, you say you have rights. They're going to look at you and say, I hope you know your rights. Or they're going to look at you and go, all right. Because the intent of what they're doing in the first place is contrary to your intent, since they're engaging in constructive trust. Constructive trust is a loophole that exists specifically for the purpose and intent of doing the complete opposite of what you intend, by flipping the table and putting you in a position that makes you look bad. That's why you're always the defendant in every circumstance, when in truth, you're just trying to go by living your life and not be disturbed. To you, it's simple. But when they bring the rush and the problem to you, you see all the complicated aspect. But what you perceive as being complicated is simple to them also, because that's their goal. You have a burden of competence. Most people have not met and cannot meet the burden of competence when it comes to the right that they say they have. Because the words that they utter, they themselves don't even know the significance and the applicability of these words, let alone what they say their rights are. This is a wake-up call. No one is here to make you feel bad. If you do, okay, feel bad. You're going to feel bad regardless of whether someone tells you the truth or not. But nonetheless, this is a wake-up call for you to be as specific as possible when it comes to competence. No one knows everything. But whatever it is that we know now, most people have the wrong or the lopsided perspective of these things. But once upon a time, so did I. Now I'm letting you know now, if you're stumbling upon this video, save yourself the years of headache and know these basics. Don't just run away with some PDFs that use certain words to tell you certain cute things. Something about some redemption manual, creditors and their bonds. Start using all these buzzwords. You would chase after your tail years after years after years. You will have nothing to show for. And if you do, it will be minimal compared to where you actually are supposed to be had you taken a different path. But if you choose, continue on that path. It's the time of your life that you're using up. Instead, constructive trusts are largely said to be triggered. Remember, here the formal definition tells you that it arises. Same word as trigger. Same meaning and significance as being triggered. Instead, constructive trusts are largely said to be triggered by unconscionability, meaning something is being done that ought not to have been done. That's why they always say, oh, you broke the law. Oh, you broke the terms and conditions of this contract. So you're the one in the wrong. We're suing you. Can you believe most people are actually afraid to sue? Because most people really don't know their rights. And deep down, they're afraid to sue people because they themselves know they're not prepared. This is part of the preparation, so that you see the subtle details in everything that makes up the whole. This is the idea that a defendant, oftentimes the everyday man, would be unjustly enriched. They are going to keep you broke and poor, to keep the majority of the everyday man and woman in the position of a pauper, where the king controls the typical slave and subject. If you want to see the applicability of that Intercartera Divina and the Pauper Bulls and the mission statement of Rockefeller in the School of Tomorrow that we went over a video regarding education, the applicability and the medium they're doing it through is constructive trust. They've created a loophole called constructive trust to justify it. You have to see the truth of these things now. This is the idea. An idea is a thought. The thoughts are the first stage of physical things. Someone saw this in their mind, and their will is done on earth as it is in heaven. They are creating this reality. These are ancient things that's been done. This is not new. It's been done through different systems, through ages, through different cultures. It exists. And it's being done right now. This is the idea that a defendant will be unjustly enriched if they were allowed to keep property for themselves. Who else is not allowed to keep property? Serfs. Serfdom is just a very kind word to the ears and the mind by substituting the word slave or slavery for the word serf. Slaves are not allowed to hold property. And they're saying it is unjust for you to hold properties because it would enrich you. The main issue with this argument is that we would have to have a really broad approach to unjust enrichment. Unjust enrichment has a stand element in test also. In order for a constructive trust to come under the underpinning concept, in order for us to understand constructive trust, meaning we're not going to go into the details of what unjust enrichment means, because if you look at the element standing in the test of unjust enrichment, you realize that the way that they use constructive trust against people does not even apply. So they're saying, well, in order for us to really justify constructive trust on the concept that someone is trying to prevent the unjust enrichment of another, we'll have to go into details of what unjust enrichment means, but we'll leave that in abeyance. We'll leave it hanging. We'll suspend it for now. That's what they give to you on the definition section. They made reference to footnote 5, to a case law specific to trust issues where constructive trust was brought into question. When you see this West Dutch, 1996, and all these other references, Brown Wilkinson, it's making reference to this case law when it comes to the trust issues and constructive trust. We'll stop there so that this video is not going to be too prolonged. But the questions that's been posed along each stages of this video, ask yourself these same questions. Do some self-reflection as to the world that you're really stepping in when it comes to pen and paper. See, most people are better off not even stepping into the world of these things of these nature. They're better off not even doing anything regarding it until they know these basics, because they are either making it worse for themselves and or others who are currently doing the same thing or to come in the future. And these people on the other end are very, very, very happy because they see, all right, now you have a sense of urgency to do better and learn better. Good. But legalese is a world of its own. The varying degrees of it is a world of its own. So once you figure out something or hear something, don't conclude that you really know it, because there's a lot involved. You didn't get to the point you got here overnight. That's all you came here for, to learn. When people ask, what are we here on earth for? What is my purpose? Begin by learning. Start there. Granted, some people don't even ask themselves that question. But if you do somehow ask yourself that question, the nature of it warrants wisdom. The fact that you're asking a question is saying there's an insufficient amount of wisdom that exists that you need to acquire. Shouldn't the fact that you're asking a question automatically tell you that part of the answer or the beginning of the answer itself is to study? And there are varying degrees to studying. Studying itself is tethered to the law of time. Take your time. Don't rush it. If you're meant to get it, you're going to get it. If you're not, you're simply not. But regardless of whether you're getting it or not, know that the mere act of you trying to figure it out adds to the collective consciousness of humanity. Only one mind exists. There are varying degrees to how that mind expresses itself. You and I are just the same thing, observing each other from different angles. That's all. So your mere act of trying to figure it out that neural pathways, those billions of neurons in your mind, we all, at least at this point, should also know that those things in the mind, which exist throughout the whole body. When I say neurons, I'm not just speaking about the organ brain. I'm speaking about the whole body. Those things in the mind are directly connected to what everything else has outside, beyond Earth. So if it's firing up inside of you, that means it's also changing something that goes beyond what you can observe with the five senses, within space, time, and otherwise. So don't give up on yourself, but take your time, and don't come to the conclusion that because you've been doing something for 5 years, because you've heard someone confidently speak about something and it sounded good, that you've got it. Don't neuter yourself. Don't put a cap on yourself. You are worth way more than that. Keep learning, keep growing. And power to you. On the Patreon page, we'll be going over something called a Cypress Trust. Because a Cypress Trust is the core of what this thing called a constructive trust is. On YouTube, we'll just go over the basic definition. On Patreon, we'll go over the core of it, called a Cypress Trust. Until next time, take care. Best of luck.